Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Well, hello from Shattered Reality Podcast. Here we are. Today is October 23rd, 2018, and I am Fahrusha, and we are Shattered Reality Podcast. Now, once again, unfortunately, my partner in crime, Miss Kate Valentine, who wanted very much to be here today because she absolutely adored the book that we will largely be talking about on this particular podcast, which I believe is lucky number 77. And we have a very wonderful guest today. We also have had a lot of response to our last podcast, which was the podcast with Grant Cameron, the Canadian UFO researcher who was a very, very dedicated man. So I respect him deeply. But today's guest is also someone who is extraordinarily respectable. From Great Britain, we have Mary Rose Barrington, who has written a book about things that seem to have a life of their own. The book is called J.O.T.T, which stands for Just One of Those Things. And it basically revolves around psychokinesis, sometimes called telekinesis, of mostly small objects. So please welcome Mary Rose Barrington. Hello, Mary Rose Barrington.
Hello, Fahrusha.
May I call...
Very nice to be with you.
Thank you. May I call you Mary Rose, or what would you like
certainly.
me to... Okay, Mary Rose. So what we'd like to hear about first is a little bit about who you are and how you came to be a very important member of the Society for Psychical Research in Great Britain.
Well, I think I always was interested in things that were peculiar. I think my older brother introduced me to ghost stories and that sort of thing. But when I was 15 and browsing around the occult section of the Oxford bookshop, Blackwell's, I saw a book called Survival of Man by Sir Oliver Lodge. Well, now I did know that he was a great scientist, and I thought, well, if he's written a book about survival, maybe it's possible, because I certainly didn't believe in any religious doctrines. And that really started me off on psychical research, because he really covered the whole field, as well as really concentrating in some degree on the question of whether it's possible for the the personality and the memory to survive death and have another kind of existence. So I got into it at an early age, and then when I was at Oxford University, there was a society, and so I learned a lot from that. And then later, I suppose about 10 years later, because I assumed that these people were all very learned, so since I've discovered members are quite ordinary people, so finally I joined the Society for Psychical Research and really have been hooked on it ever since.
Well, I have two questions to ask about that. What were you studying at Oxford, and when did you join SRP?
Well, actually, I was reading English at the university, but later, actually, on a more practical level, I became a barrister and then later a solicitor. well, you might as well say a lawyer of some
Yes.
sort.
Now, and this is just to clear things up for our listeners who are not really that familiar with the legal system in Great Britain. Barristers and solicitors are two different kinds of legal people in
Yes.
Great Britain, and a barrister tries the case, and a solicitor
Well,
explain.
not quite. A barrister gives advice and he appears in court and he appears in the higher courts. Now, a solicitor sits in an office dealing with people and also appears as an advocate in the lower courts.
Okay. Okay, that takes care of things because I think that lots of Americans read British literature and they come across the word barrister or solicitor, and it gives them pause for thought.
Yes, must be confusing.
Yes,
Yes.
it is a bit confusing. So you've had a legal career then, besides being a member of the SRP.
Oh, yes, SPR
I'm
actually.
sorry. I'm sorry.
SPR.
SPR.
Yes. Yes, that's correct. Yes, it's been quite useful actually. Sometimes the lines have crossed.
Well, clearly, a legal mind is a mind that is very finely tuned to details and asking pertinent questions to people who have claims of any sort.
Well, I think yes, that is a point. Whereas scientists seem to be convinced that nothing happens that can't be proved by science to have happened, lawyers decide what is real by testimony, and witnesses backing each other up. The weight of evidence that tells you not a principle the way science does, but actually tells you about an event, something that really happened, and has to be explained.
Indeed, indeed. And I might add that much of science, not all of science, but much of science tends to be related to the 3D world and equates brain with mind, whereas philosophy and some of physics takes that into question. But many scientists that, or technicians more likely, that deal on the more day-to-day level do not make that transfer that mind may be more than physical gray matter between the ears.
Well, certainly, if you take something like telepathy into account, then you really have to go beyond the brain.
Indeed. So you have written this very marvelous book, J.O.T.T, just one of those things. And someone who I spoke to it about it with said to me, "Why isn't it Jute then?" Because they wanted you to use both O's. But I tried to explain to them that of was not used in this case. But that, putting that aside, tell us a little bit about how you came to write J.O.T.T.
Well, I suppose I started with my personal experience, though it's by no means the easiest one to explain without some illustrations. But I did have a very simple J.O.T. in which, well, rather typically, an object really of no interest whatever, a little red covered account book, lived in the left-hand drawer in my office, and my temporary secretary used to come to me at the end of the week telling me how many hours she'd worked, and I would then put my hand into the drawer and take out the red notebook, and she would write in it how many hours she'd worked, what she was going to be paid, and I would have her to go and pay herself from the till. And on one occasion, I put my hand in the drawer and couldn't feel the book. So I pulled the drawer out and I couldn't see the book. And there wasn't much in the drawer. And I put my hand in and trawled all over the surface, and there was no book. So then I took my eyes away from the drawer and looked up at her, and she looked at me and said, well, I said, where is it then? And she said, I don't know. And then we both looked back in the drawer for some reason, and there it was, sitting right on top, staring us in the face. And I thought, well, how could this happen? And that really started me on the possibility that things actually go out of existence, and when you're not looking, they come back.
Indeed.
And I suppose that really started me. Later, she said she wasn't sure that she had looked in the drawer. And that was rather undermining because, after all, I had a witnessed incident.
Yes.
And this very often happens, that people who are perfectly certain of something at the time it happens, when they reflect on it later, think, no, it couldn't have happened. I didn't see it.
Yes, indeed. And this is reminding me, that particular aspect is reminding me a little bit of a scientist who I am probably sure, I'm almost sure that you're familiar with. And that is somebody who passed about 10 years ago named Lyle Watson, who was, I guess that is a Welsh name, but he came from South Africa and then later lived in Australia, as far as I recall. And he spoke about things happening when you are innocent enough to believe they can happen. And then once you have adopted a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The reality, the group reality, the accepted reality around you, then it's no longer possible. So these things no longer happen. So people don't see fairies, and they don't levitate, and a number of things because they don't believe it's possible.
Oh, that's right. It's not the current paradigm. That's your word.
Yes. The consensus reality is, I
Yes,
think that's actually, though the current paradigm works just as well, gets the point across.
Yeah.
So that seems to be a part of the issue. When you don't have to believe something, you simply need to suspend disbelief that it can't happen.
Yes, I think. I think this is why you get such sensational things happening in physical seances. You have a group of people who mainly believe that it can happen, and it happens. And then sometimes within the group you get someone come in who says, no, it can't happen, and they can actually stop it happening.
Yes, and it seems important in terms of seance groups that the people meet and know each other, and that they meet not necessarily regularly every Tuesday or anything like that, but sort of like that they have a kind of ongoing meeting pattern, and that they get to know one another, and then suddenly tables start to levitate and so forth. We had a guest on who was is a sociologist named James McLennan, who lives a little bit to the south of where we are, but witnessed a great deal of that sort of seance activity in conjunction with a doctor, I believe William Cox, out in the Midwest. And they just had this group going that was just incredible, with all kinds of stuff happening. And of course, no one in the parapsychology world fully believed them. So they were trying to prove it one way or the other, and they could find no problem with the events. But once somebody else came in from the outside world, well, nothing would happen, or it would somehow look like there might be some fraud, but fraud couldn't be proven, nor could it be proven the other way. So you're left in this no man's land.
Yes, I remember that. Yes. Yes, that was one of the things that certainly there was a lot of controversy about.
And still remains so. So you have one of your chapters is a framework for J.O.T.T, and perhaps you could give us some of your feelings or your theories about why this happens, and also a quick summary of the various kinds, because I found that kind of interesting, the Flyaway and so forth.
Yes,
The
right.
windfall. I'm looking for a windfall. We have $1 billion coming down tonight on the lottery here, so we're all looking for a windfall. But that's a different kind of windfall. Go ahead, Mary Rose.
Well, I suppose the basic jottle, as I call them, the basic jottle is a walkabout. And that is when something, well, for example, you put down your pen on the right-hand side, if you're a right-handed person, and it disappears. And for some reason, you find it on the left-hand side. And you think to yourself, I must have put it there, but in fact, you didn't. It, in a sense, ceased to exist on the right-hand side. Perhaps it was trying to tell you you were working too hard.
Yes.
And when you found it on the left-hand side, you decided to take a break. Well, there is also the comeback. And the comeback is, you might say, a variety of walkabout, except that the article comes back to the same place. You look at it and it's not there. And then generally people go away and look somewhere else. I must have put it somewhere else. And then you come back and there it is, well, staring you in the face like my little red book. Now the next one, well, you can take them in various orders. There is the turn up. When you find something, it's like a walkabout. At that end, you find something that wasn't there before, and you don't know exactly where it came from. All you know is that it was not there when you last inspected that place, usually quite recently, and then suddenly it was there. And that's a turn up. Then there is the Flyaway. And I think your painter, Raymond Bayliss, he had a very nice Flyaway in which a paintbrush dropped on the floor, and though he and his students searched for it on an absolutely bare floor, it was never seen again. And it was quite a substantial article, I think about 14 inches long and 1 inch wide. And I'm afraid people are reporting flyaways all over the country. And I must say it has to be a very good reason for accepting a flyaway as not something that you just mislaid or lost or couldn't find. And then there is the Windfall, which Fahrusha talked about. And Windfall is when some article you have never seen simply arrives, and you find it, but you have absolutely no idea where it came from. And again, you know that it wasn't there before when you last saw that place. And on the whole, these things tend to be a bit worthless. So one of my people did actually find a Victorian ring, which she wore. And I think the most remarkable one is Trade-In, when you lose an article and then round about the same place that you lost it, you find a similar article. It's not the same, but it is similar. It's as if you'd been given a kind of substitute, or someone was trying to pass off the thing as the one you lost. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And I suppose my most remarkable case is that of a very distinctive brooch that was made up of two horseshoes with a hunting horn in the middle, and very much prized by the elderly lady who lost it, who happened to be a medium, actually.
Uh-huh.
And so she said she hoped it would come back. And about 10 weeks later, she found the brooch pinned to a dress that had been rather flung on a couch because she didn't want it in the wardrobe. She didn't like it, but hadn't actually taken such decisive action as to throw it away. But there was this brooch on this disfavored dress, and she was thrilled. But her husband, Lucian Lando, had been an engineer, and he was a great tinkerer, and he liked to know how everything worked and the precise details of it. And he happened to know that the original brooch had a hunting horn in which you could see through it from one side to the other, and it could be rotated in its setting. But the brooch that came back, the hunting horn was fixed, and you couldn't see through it.
Extraordinary, yes.
And there were various other details. Now, his wife, he never told her because she was so happy at getting her brooch back, but he knew that it wasn't the same article. And yet, it was a very distinctive pattern. No, you don't just find two horseshoes and a hunting horn through them that can be rotated every day of the week.
No. No, I've never seen a brooch like either of them. So it certainly is an unusual object. I'm sorry to have interrupted you.
No.
You please go on.
That's the end of it.
Oh, okay. In parapsychological community in the United States, the windfall is often referred to as an apport.
Yes, that's right. Oh, in England too. That is a traditional name for it, certainly. And I think there are various other names. Well, they would be called disappearing objects, and what I suppose a flyaway would simply be called a dematerialization, which, in my understanding, is exactly what it is.
The gentleman with the disappearing stamp, where he could feel it.
Yes, he felt it
dematerializing.
Yes,
that was quite. It was a very simple one of your stories. It was perhaps one of the most simple, but it was also somewhat the most unsettling in some way.
Yes, he was carrying this stamp of which he had only one of a particular value, and as he crossed the room, looking at it and holding it firmly between thumb and index finger, he just felt it dematerialize. Didn't drop to the floor, but it just went. I don't know what reason there was for that. Perhaps there was some reason known to his subconscious mind that it wouldn't be a good idea to mail that letter just at that time. But
I would say that would put a crimp in almost anyone's sense of reality. And
yes, it does.
I would almost wish it would happen to more, not skeptics, but debunkers. I am not against skeptics. I think skeptics are good folks who look at things and try to make a different kind of sense of them. But it's debunkers that I really totally wish things like this would happen to sort of give them a kick in the pants, if you know what I mean.
I think it does occasionally. But on the other hand, it's very soon forgotten.
True. Or they will deny that it ever happened. I know of a famous skeptic whose name is, of course, escaping me, who got married and had an extraordinary experience. He was an older man to have gotten married at the time, like I would say at least in his 50s. And he was marrying, and his wife had a grandfather who was deceased, I believe, and there was all kinds of strange stuff going on around the grandfather's radio, which played without it being plugged in and so forth. But still, this notorious debunker couldn't bring himself to figure out that something paranormal was going on.
Oh, yes, I think there can be enormous resistance. Well, the Professor Arthur Ellison once laid on a demonstration in which he rather cunningly arranged for a magnet to lift something up. And people thought that he was demonstrating something paranormal. But there were one or two people there who just said nothing happened. Nothing rose up. Because they couldn't bear to think that they'd witnessed a paranormal event. I call this scientific fundamentalism.
Indeed.
Look on it as a kind of belief system.
Well, certainly what we call scientism here is like a religion of science. And I would refer to Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller, who are a well-known American magician duo. And Teller never speaks, but Penn Jillette, who is the larger member of the duo, he goes about creating effects that have been created by psychics and mediums and practitioners of the paranormal. And he then says, well, you see, I've done this and I'm not doing anything paranormal. I'll tell you how I did it. And psychic people and people who are in psychical research, they turn around and say to him, well, just because you can levitate someone by trickery doesn't mean that anytime anyone levitates, it was done by trickery. I only use the levitation as an example.
Yes. Well, it's very often said by opponents of paranormal reality that no psychic has ever performed in front of a skilled magician, and the magician hasn't known how he did it. Well, actually, this is absolutely false, because there was a French psychic called Alexis Didier, and he actually demonstrated in front of the very famous magician whose name was Houdin, which is actually the name adopted by Houdini, because he was such an admirer of Houdin. And anyway, Didier completely astonished the magician. He was able to tell him what was written on the line of a book that the magician took out of his pocket, and he was able to play card games in which the magician had blindfolded him, and even as the magician held his cards under the table, Didier could tell him what his cards were. And he well, I mean, those were the simple things, but he also did incredibly complicated things like relating the origin of articles that people showed him. And anyway, the magician actually made a public statement, because he had actually been paid to examine GDA. And in fact, this statement was blazoned all over the European press, probably the world press, because he said that he had no doubt about the authenticity of GDA's paranormal abilities, and that he could teach GDA how to do his tricks, but GDA could never tell him or train him to do what GDA did. And this is historical fact.
Uh-huh. Well,
but it's denied daily by the debunkers.
Well, I know that I happen to know a good amount of magicians here in the New York City area. And I would say that 2/3 of those magicians thoroughly poo-poo the idea of psychic phenomena. But 1/3 of them freely admits that they have been in situations where they knew stuff about their audience members that they had no ordinary way of knowing. And furthermore, we have had a couple of times on this podcast physicist Russell Targ, who I'm happy to call a friend. And when he was a young man in Manhattan, the teenager, he practiced sleight of hand. And he began to realize while practicing sleight of hand that indeed he knew things that he shouldn't have known just from doing the trick. And he went on to a wonderful career in physics, but which included being one of the, I'm going to call him the godfathers of remote viewing, and has experienced and facilitated many, many thousands of instances of psychic phenomena, and was paid by the government, the American government, to do so in the remote viewing programs.
I can well understand that, because in Europe too, the main investigators of the most, I suppose, dramatic form of paranormal, which is materialization and dematerialization, which of course is the basic of J.O.T.T, as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. They've all been scientists, but they've been such eminent scientists, fellows of the Royal Society, or Nobel Prize winners, or at least professors, who tenured people who can do as they like. And those people at the top, they're not afraid of saying that they're perfectly certain that these things happen. I'm afraid it's people rather lower down the hierarchy who fear for their careers if they actually admit to paranormal beliefs or opinions.
Well, those who are risking their livelihood, I think many of them are technicians as opposed to research scientists who may be a little bit more open, true research scientists. But let's get back to J.O.T.T. And let's repeat that we have here on the air with us Mary Rose Barrington from Great Britain, who has written a marvelous book called J.O.T.T, just one of those things. So, Mary Rose, would you like to tell us where your book may be available?
Yes, I think you have to go through Amazon. But beware, there is another book called J.O.T., recently published.
Oh, no.
It's what I call one of those things, just one of those things.
Indeed.
It is I mean, I read a bit of it because Amazon does, give you the opportunity to do that. I never discovered why it's called J.O.T.T. But there it is. You have to be rather careful. There is a kind of subtitle to my book on J.O.T.T, which is when things disappear and come back or relocate, and why it really happens. And so there we are. You get it through Amazon, but if you just put in J.O.T., you might get the other one.
I see. Well, we have to emphasize your name as well because I'm quite sure that the other one wasn't written by Mary Rose Barrington.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Well, we're lucky in terms of that. In any case, so expound a little bit, if you will, on your theories about the reasons for J.O.T.T.
Oh, yes. Well, it's difficult to put in a nutshell, but I suppose it comes down to saying that the fundamental reality really is consciousness, and that mind and matter are, in a sense, the front and the back of the same coin, or the inside and the outside of the same piece of fabric, and interchangeable in a way. But it's like mind being awake and matter being asleep. And the fluid mind actually controls the matter, tells it how to organize itself. So what I'm saying really is that the material world is held in place by the operation of the subconscious minds of humans. Maybe animals play a part, but the human mind is much stronger, so I suspect it is the human mind that really keeps matter in place. And it has to obey the laws of this particular reality, which is a causal reality. It's causal in the sense that it's sequential. Anything that happens has to be consistent with what happened before and what's going to happen after. So it's sequential in that sense, whether causal or not. But in common speech, I call that the causal reality, held in place by the subconscious action of human minds. And if for some reason it is to your advantage, or it gives you a lesson of some sort for something that was there not to be there anymore, it may actually be disassembled by your own subconscious, and then it reverts to what I call potentiality, which is rather like something I think probably more familiar to people who read popular science, as I do. It's rather like something going out of particle existence into vibrational existence. In fact, the parallel is almost exact, because whereas in the particle existence you see and feel and touch and the thing is there, when it's in vibrational form, then as far as your perceptions are concerned, it's not there anymore. And this can happen because you are fatigued, or you're in a reverie, in a brown study, you're tired, you're not really paying attention. And then I do suspect that quite a lot of things actually, I call them deactualizing. And you won't know about it actually unless you happen to want that particular article. And then you find it's not there. But I'm sure you have a direction from a kind of, what should I say? I call it the environmental control, that that actually makes you bring it back, because there must be some kind of balance of things that disappear and things that come back because of the balance between mind and matter. And so it may come back in the right place, may come back in the wrong place, it may appear to the wrong person, in which case they will get a windfall or even a trade-in, or who knows what a flyaway does. Does a flyaway really remain permanently deactualized, or is it always somewhere else? Well, I think there's no way of knowing that. So that, you might say, is the theoretical model behind J.O.T.T.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of questions around those ideas, which all seem quite plausible to me. But I do have a few questions. And the first one is other players. By other players, let's take the case of the woman who had the plants removed from her windowsill and ended up on the roof of her conservatory. I'm not sure I've got that exactly right. And
Yes,
she had both an ex-husband who had passed and a companionate relationship with a man who also had passed, sort of in sequence. And the man who she had the companionate relationship with was helped her with gardening, and her husband was somehow in law enforcement. And do you think that people who have these things going on, that sometimes some discarnate entity, such as a deceased person or somebody, or some being that never was human, might have an effect on objects in our 3D reality?
well, I certainly don't rule out the possibility. I think that's one of the few J.O.T.Ts in which someone who was no longer living might, plausibly be thought to have some kind of effect. But I think the effect would be on the mind of the living person, and the deactualization, or the walkabout in this case, I would think would be affected by her.
Okay. All right. The second sort of question I have in the same general vein is that there is this concept in not in psychic research, but it does flow over into psychic research. It comes from the spiritual side of things, which often says we are all one. Okay,
Yes.
we're all one, down to matter, even down. We're all one. I'm one with an ant crawling across the rug, as well as a stone in the backyard. Let us say, just for argument's sake.
Yes.
And also in this regard, it is considered that everything has consciousness, from the glass of water I'm looking at here on the table at which I am sitting, all the way to the greatest genius and a giraffe running through Africa. That we all have consciousness on some level, even objects, even like the Earth may have a separate consciousness, and it's called Gaia. And the Moon has a consciousness, and Jupiter has a consciousness. Purportedly, I'm not making a case for it like of absolutes, but this is what is thought consistently. So, if something happens to this glass of water, if it were to move across the table, could I wonder whether I did it, whether our wonderful engineer Bill did it, or whether the water did it of its own volition? The glass, rather, would probably have to be, or the glass and the water together, or are we all one and it's hard to tell who did what?
Well, I think I would personally rule out the idea that the glass of water did it, but because I think even though you might think something has not exactly a mind, but a control center, shall we say, I think it's always the human mind is the most powerful mind around, one would have to say. And if there is, as I suspect, a universal telepathic linkage between subconscious minds, then of course it's a mind of extraordinary power. And the question does arise if the glass of water moves across the surface. It's really a kind of concept, the glass of water. I mean, as far as scientific reality is concerned, you might say it's a conglomerate of particles. And so, I mean, as an objective object, it doesn't really exist. It's the concept of the glass of water that makes it a unit. And if that glass of water were to dematerialize, again, as a scientific object, it doesn't make sense, because a glass of water is not really anything but, as I say, a conglomerate of atoms. So I feel sure that the mind that conceives of a glass of water is the one that controls the action. But whether it is sending its communication to it as a concept glass of water, or whether it's sending it multitudes of orders or directions or compulsions, is it sending it to the control center of each particle? Well, I don't really know, but I do think it is actually the concept that you're communicating with and actually ordering to deactualize.
Okay. Well, I certainly can. I guess I put this question out not in any way to challenge the situation, only because I myself am trying to understand as best I can from.
Yes, and I don't know that I gave you a very coherent answer.
No, it was quite good, and it does bring to mind two things that are both, I would say, scientifically above my pay grade, and
Mine too.
and that is the idea of the particle. One particle meets another particle, and then they're interwoven forever, and they always have a.
Yes.
There's that theory of physics, and then there is also the concept that the world, for whatever reality the physical world may or may not have, which, we could talk about that forever, what we get through the windows of the senses are a very small amount of what is out there. And it's a small amount of the electromagnetic spectrum that comes into our eyes and ears, for instance.
Oh, yes.
And what we get is something that has been biologically developed in our organism so that we might live a little bit longer, that we might avoid the predator lion or the predator man with the gun. And so we are evolutionarily designed to see certain things, whereas my house cats indeed are doing something else, seeing something else. They may see something similar because they're mammals, but in fact, they don't see the exact same thing. And some animals, like I remember trying to connect with somebody's pet lizard. Oddly, I was waiting to go on a TV show, and it was all about animal communication. And a gentleman who had been in prison, and while in prison, was raising some animals for his own betterment and for the betterment of the animals. You know what I mean? He was trying to
Yes.
rehabilitate himself, and he was a nice guy. And he had this lizard with him, and I was sitting in what is called the green room, waiting to go on this TV program. And I asked him about this lizard, and I asked him if I could touch the lizard. And he said, sure, just he gave me certain instructions. And the lizard was a medium sized lizard, probably its body was less than a foot long, but with the tail, which was quite long, maybe almost 2 feet long. And so I gently touched the lizard, the back of the lizard's head, and went down the spinal column, just sort of like to pet the lizard in a way. And the lizard was very passive and didn't do anything aggressive towards me. But I suddenly was sort of transported and saw things as though they were crystalline, like for an instant, like a very small instance in time, saw a crystalline world. And now I can't prove that that's what the lizard saw, but it did affect me. It did affect me and made me wonder about my own perceptions and the perceptions of common animals around us as possibly being
Yes.
different.
Well, of course, we can't ask them, but I don't know. I have the impression that when my cat looks into my eyes, that, she sees the same sort of things when I look into her eyes. So, I think we've got a lot in common.
Oh, yes.
And I don't know, I don't look on the psychic faculty as something that's evolving, because if anything, I would think it's rather retreating, because, there seemed to be a great deal more going on in the past than there is now. I have an idea that, it's all your basic belief system, isn't it? And I think that science now performs such wonders, and together with technology seems to be miraculous, that I think people are very imbued with the idea that it is the only thing that really counts, and that anything that they say is incompatible with it couldn't possibly exist. And I have an idea that the psychic faculty now actually is rather shrinking.
I'm not totally sure about that, but I think in the large, in volume of people in the world who respect or run after technological achievements and the wonders that they may bring to us, they would tend to downplay psychic phenomena. But because there are so many more people in the world now, purportedly than ever, and I believe that's probably the case, that there is probably more variety of persons. So we may, in fact, get some extraordinary cases of psychic phenomena amongst certain people who do accept it, because there are so many more people. It's just a matter of finding and perhaps aggregating those people together.
Well, of course, yes, it's true. I mean, quite honestly, I was talking about the people probably in England and in Europe generally, but I wasn't taking into account of the amazing things that you hear from Brazil, for example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I want to continue just for a bit more if you don't mind. And I really like the story of the orange plastic bowl. Maybe,
Oh, that's amazing, yes.
perhaps you'd like to share that one with us, and then I'll tell you about a jot that I had that had to do with the Isle of Skye.
Ah, right. Well, the orange washing up bowl. Yeah, that's extraordinary. Well, now, the lady I called DP, she incidentally is pretty well up in psychical research in Scotland. And she washed up the dishes for she and her husband had dinner while he went out and walked the dog, so she was in the house by herself. She put the dishes away in a cupboard and then turned back to the sink to put the bowl back in the sink. She had taken it out and removed the dishes. Now she wants to put it back. But the washing up bowl simply wasn't where she left it, which was on the drainer. Perhaps I should explain that in England, most kitchens have a single sink, not a double one. And usually, to wash up a small amount of dishes, you use a plastic bowl. And that's what I mean by the bowl. Mm-hmm. And so the bowl had disappeared from the draining board. This was quite a small kitchen, which she searched. And when her husband came back, he searched, and the bowl could not be found. And after a day or two, she had to replace it, fortunately with a red bowl, because they didn't have orange anymore. And then a week went by, and she wanted to get something that she didn't often use. I know, the pressure cooker. And the pressure cooker lived in a lower cupboard, and the cupboard doors had a table in front of them, because she didn't really often have recourse to that cupboard. So she moved the table, opened the doors, and found that the pressure cooker, in some extraordinary way, seemed to be wedged in. So she called her husband, very useful to have a witness for these things, and he pulled out the pressure cooker, and then he investigated why it seemed to be so, so crowded in that cupboard. And what he discovered was that behind the pressure cooker and wedged in between other articles, there was the orange washing up bowl. And it was the one that had disappeared from the draining board. It still had little traces of dirty water in it and a few teaspoons. So he brought it up. And, well, it is, because, it is agreed that people in a state of distraction do put things in the wrong place. I'm sure we've all done it. Mm-hmm. But think what she had to do between putting the dishes in the cupboard and turning round and finding the bowl had disappeared. She would have had to move a table, open a couple of cupboard doors, take out the pressure cooker, push in the bowl into a restricted space, put back the pressure cooker, close the doors, and put the table back in front of them. Well, I don't think you do that in a moment of distraction.
No.
So
indeed.
That is probably the most remarkable walkabout of all.
Well, the replacement walkabouts tend to make me feel like I'm crazy. Because I'll have a pen and it'll clearly say, it'll be a white pen and it'll say Rousseau's Liquors on it or something like that. And I'll be using it and I'll put it down, a ballpoint pen. I'll walk away. I'll come back and there's the white pen, and instead of saying Russo's Liquors, it will have some sort of an insignia and say Smith's Garage on it or something of that nature. And I think, yeah, I must be losing it. I must just be losing it. So I haven't done much to memorialize or to write down those kinds of jots that may have occurred to me, because I just blame my sorry brain. However, I've had some extraordinary ones, and perhaps the most extraordinary one of all is the one which took place, I believe, 19 years ago. It was less than 20 years ago, between 18 and 20 years ago. I was traveling to Scotland the first time I was getting to go with my daughter and my husband. And my daughter was at the time, I believe, already in primary school. And she had a habit. She had lots of stuffed animals, a goodly number of them. They were all on a deep bookshelf in her room. And some of them she slept with at night. Some of them had names, some of them didn't. And she had a number of white bears. And a white bear is not involved in this story at all. But she had some very favorite stuffed animals, which she preferred over dolls. She did have dolls as well, but she called the stuffed animals her friends.
Sounds just like me.
And so she was perhaps 6 at the time. And I would have to look back into my notes to ascertain that this was, in fact, the exact age that she was. But it was in that time frame. And she wanted to bring one of her friends with her. And I think it was probably Socks Boy, which she had since pretty much almost since birth, and was named after Bill Clinton's cat, Socks, who was very popular in the United States then, the cat Socks. Of course, the president was reasonably popular as well. But the Socks was the name of the cat, and it was a tuxedo cat of Mr. Clinton's. And so this cat, which was a small stuffed animal, was also a tuxedo cat. And I suggested perhaps that she should not bring Socks Boy with her, because God help us if she lost it on this transatlantic flight or in one of the various places that we were going to stay. And we did really make quite a complete circle of Scotland, starting in Edinburgh and moving up the coast, past a variety of different stone circles and Hillow Staines and islands to the north, where Scarabray is, and finally down towards the place where the giant vegetables grew, Findhorn, and also went to the wonderful Loch Ness of the Loch Ness Monster. So finally, we were on the rebound of the trip. The return. Yeah. The return of the circle, and we went out for 2 nights to a place called the Isle of Skye, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. I don't know if all Americans are, but it's a beautiful island in the east coast of Scotland. And
the West Coast.
The West Coast. Okay. That's right, the West Coast. I'm sorry, I get my directions.
Well, it's not your country.
Yes, indeed. The West Coast of Scotland, the closest part to the North America, in fact, is the West Coast. But it's close to the East Coast of North America. Not close, but it's closest. So that's, I think, my confusion with the directions. However, we went there, and there was sheep shearing and all sorts of things going on, which were interesting. Rosalie got to see a lot of different kinds of animals and a more direct farm experience than she had prior to that. Now, what we had decided upon before leaving is that she would take a little gray bear-like animal that I don't believe had a name, but it was not similar in most ways from any other of her stuffed animals. And while she didn't favorite it, she also often had it on her bed and would be sleeping with it. So she rather liked it, we would say. And she had it during the trip, and if she hadn't had it, she would be very disconsolate because she wouldn't have had a friend to sleep with, a stuffed animal friend. So there we were on the Isle of Skye, and we were staying with a woman in a bed and breakfast type situation in a rather small room with one double bed and one cot for Rosalie. And there we were, and it was kind of, I would say, cramped in that room. It was quite nice and nothing wrong with it, but it was tight for three people. And I also remember oddly that it was set down from the ground level. If you looked out the window or stepped out the door, this room would have been like set down like a foot below the surface of the ground.
Lower ground floor, we'd call that.
Yes. And I don't remember whether there was more than one floor in this modest home, which was very clean, very nice. The woman was nice, and she was a grandma. And it sort of had a permanent wave, very typical sort of looking grandmotherly person, and very pleasant and very nice to my daughter. And after we left and went on to our last stop, which was Glasgow, it became clear that Rosalie had left the bottom of her pajamas and this little stuffed animal behind. And I was sad about it. I mean, the pajamas weren't anything special, but I felt that when I got home, I would offer the woman postage and a little bit more if she wouldn't mind sending it back. So 2 days later, we got on the plane and at the airport closest to Edinburgh and headed back for the US of A. And when we opened the door to Rosalie's room, on the bed was her stuffed animal. This little gray, sort of teddy bearish sort of thing, but it's not the straightforward teddy bear. It's sort of like a variant. And it's kind of important because I was particular about bringing something that wasn't just another white bear, because for whatever reason she had 3 or 4 of those, and I said, well, why don't we take this one? And there are none other like it, and I haven't seen any other like it, but I do still have that particular article. And the interesting thing is that her father, like many of your people in the book, J.O.T.T, at this point, I don't remember that. I don't remember that as having happened. Well, she and I know it did happen, and she would have been bereft the entire trip without a stuffed animal, and that was the one, in fact, she did bring, but it did turn up on her bed when we returned.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, it's rather like the story of the black corset, isn't it?
Yes.
But of course, yes, I suppose the black corset meant the same to Van Loon's mother as your not quite a white bear to your child.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very nice story. Did you ever ascertain from the boarding house lady in Skye that it wasn't there?
I did write her an email. I think it was an email at that point in time. I'm quite sure email wasn't quite what it is today, but I think that I did write to her saying that if she found anything of ours, including a possibly a stuffed animal and pajama pants if she might send them along, and I would compensate her. She did not respond.
Oh. Oh, yes, it might have been that she couldn't be bothered or that she didn't have anything.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
it could have been that the pants were a flyaway.
Yes.
I don't know, but she did not respond, and I didn't pursue the matter because, as I said, that the pajamas were of not great value, and when you have a growing child, the pajamas that fit them at 6 don't necessarily fit them at 7, and.
Oh, no, that's a fascinating story. And you really felt sure you could identify the not quite a bear.
Yes, and I still have the item, oddly enough.
Really?
Yeah, I still have the item, and would be pleased to display a photo thereof.
Yeah. Well, that is a really fascinating story. It's yes. I mean, immediately I thought of the flying corset, but of course it's also rather like the alarm clock that came back.
Indeed. Was there a double on the alarm clock, or am I misremembering?
Well, now what happened was the lady went to Latvia with her rather commonplace alarm clock and packed it. She's quite certain on the way home, when she was coming home, but when she opened her case, it was the wrong clock.
Right.
The clock was slightly different and didn't work. And it has all the hallmarks of somebody having changed the clocks at the last moment and her not noticing. But that was not the answer, because I think a week or so later, when she went into her entrance hall, there was her very own clock sitting in the middle of the floor. And so she then had 2 clocks.
Oh, boy. Oh.
Yes, and I must say I like the way it was in the middle of the floor, a place where she would have walked in and out, umpteen times.
Well, these things are just amazing, and if we can suspend disbelief, I think we can discover that more Jottles happen than we've heretofore thought about. And I want you to mention one more time before we go the book, the publisher, where to get it.
Oh, yes, the publisher is Anomalist Books. And yes, I think Amazon is probably the only place you'll get it. Though Amazon does use other sites too. At least I'm talking about Amazon UK. I didn't look on the Amazon, the American site. But I think that's the only way you get it. It's not going to be displayed in bookshops.
Well, I hope it becomes a bestseller and is in every bookshop across the English-speaking world and further. Maybe you'll get
Lovely.
some
thank you
translations.
Very much.
Yes, well, thank you very much for being on Shattered Reality, and I bid you a fond farewell and hope you will come on again sometime soon.
Well, I certainly enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Bye now.
Bye.
Well, folks, that was the wonderful Mary Rose Barrington from Great Britain, who discussed with us these anomalous situations involving J.O.T., just one of those things that materialize and dematerialize in our very presence and are sometimes overlooked, or we sometimes make excuses for why these things happen. Next up on Shattered Reality Podcast, we will have a return visitor. And this gentleman has been on the show before. His name is Mac Maloney. He comes to us from not so far away as Mary Rose. He comes to us from the Boston area, and he's written a new book, and he will be on with us on our next show. We have received a lot of new subscribers on YouTube, and so I would ask you all to look at our various sources of our various places where we can be heard and listened to 24/7, any day of the week, any time of the day. We have Shattered Reality Podcast.wordpress.com, shatteredrealitypodcast.com. We have an iTunes channel. We are on Stitcher, and we are on YouTube. So please like us on any of these venues. Comment if you'd like. You can comment in public or directly to me at Fahrusha@Fahrusha.com. And lately, a lot of people have been commenting privately, which is fine, but you need to let me know whether I can share what you've written publicly or not, because I'm the kind of a person who is a private person in many ways, and I do not want to in any way distract from your privacy or ruin your privacy. So please, if you're writing to me privately, but I'm allowed to say things publicly, please make a note of that, or else just write them on the comments section of one of our outlets there, and then I will know that it is for all intents and purposes public. Okay, so now, goodbye from Shattered Reality.